The hollow thud of a gavel echoed through the stuffy auction room in Circleville, Wyoming Territory, 1876, as Ruby Fletcher stood trembling on the weathered wooden platform, her wrists bound with coarse rope that bit into her skin. At 19, she never imagined she'd be sold like cattle to pay her late father's gambling debts. Yet here she stood, watching as men sized her up with calculating eyes, determining her worth as if she were nothing more than property. $500 for the girl, called a gruff voice from the back of the room. My ranch hand says she'll make a fine replacement for my dear departed Martha. Ruby's stomach twisted as she caught sight of the man Jedediah Hicks, a notorious rancher with cold, merciless eyes and a reputation for cruelty. She'd heard whispers of how his last wife had died under mysterious circumstances, leaving him with 3 young children and a sprawling ranch that needed a woman's touch. "Do I hear 600? The auctioneer called, his voice dripping with feigned enthusiasm. The crowd fell silent. Most of the townsfolk looked away in shame, unable to meet Ruby's pleading gaze. This practice was becoming uncommon even in the frontier territories, but Circleville remained a lawless outpost where money and power dictated morality. 600, came a calm, steady voice from the doorway. The crowd parted as a tall man stepped forward, his face partially obscured by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. Owen Quinn removed his hat, revealing sun-bronzed features framed by wheat-colored hair that brushed his collar. His eyes, the precise blue of a summer sky, locked with Ruby's, and she saw something there that made her breath catch, not possession or lust, but a quiet dignity. 700, Hicks countered, his voice tight with anger. 800, Owen responded without hesitation. The bidding continued until Owen's final offer of $1,200 silenced Hicks, who stormed from the auction house with a string of curses. Ruby stood frozen, uncertain whether to feel relief or terror at her new circumstance. As the auctioneer handed Owen the bill of sale, he approached the platform and gently untied Ruby's wrists. "My wagon's outside, Miss Fletcher," he said quietly. "I know you don't have a choice in this matter, but I give you my word you'll be treated with respect at my ranch." Ruby rubbed her chafed wrists, studying his face for any sign of deception. "Your wife," she whispered. "They said I'm to replace her." Owen's expression tightened momentarily. "Sarah's been gone 2 years now. Fever took her and our infant daughter within a week of each other." He led her outside to a well-maintained wagon. "I have a 10-year-old boy, Thomas, who needs more looking after than I can provide while running the ranch. I need help, but I don't expect you to be Sarah. I want you just as you are." Ruby climbed into the wagon, her worn dress catching on a splinter. Despite his kind words, she was still being purchased, still bound to a stranger's will. "How do I know you're any better than Hicks?" she asked, lifting her chin defiantly. Owen handed her a canteen of water. "You don't. But I promise you this: you'll have your own room with a lock on the door, fair treatment, and if after 6 months you wish to leave, I'll give you enough money to start fresh elsewhere." Ruby took a sip of water, considering his words. "Why would you offer that?" Owen clicked his tongue, urging the horses forward. "Because no person should be owned by another. This situation isn't of your making, and I won't compound the injustice." As they left Circleville behind, Ruby watched the dusty town recede into the distance. Her father had moved them there after her mother's death 3 years ago, promising a new start. Instead, he drunk and gambled away their meager savings, leaving Ruby with nothing but debts when pneumonia claimed him last winter. "My ranch is about 15 miles northwest," Owen explained as the wagon rolled through the sagebrush-dotted landscape. "It's not the biggest spread, but the land's good. We run about 500 head of cattle and have some decent quarter horses." Ruby nodded absently, her mind racing with questions about what her new life would entail. The warm spring sun beat down on her face, but she felt chilled to the bone. "Thomas doesn't know about the auction," Owen said suddenly. "He knows I've gone to find someone to help around the house, but not like this. No one at the ranch does." Ruby turned to him, surprised. "What will you tell them?" "That I've hired you as our housekeeper. The truth of how you came to us isn't something they need to know." Owen's hands tightened on the reins. "It would only cause you shame you don't deserve." The consideration in his voice made something shift inside Ruby. Perhaps this man was different from the others who had bid on her, men who had looked at her with ownership in their eyes. As the sun began its descent, a modest but well-maintained ranch came into view. The main house was a sturdy two-story structure built of weathered wood, with a wide front porch and smoke curling from the stone chimney. Several outbuildings dotted the property, and in the distance, Ruby could see a corral where horses grazed peacefully. A young boy burst through the front door as they approached, his face lighting up at the sight of Owen. "Pa, you're back." Thomas Quinn was all gangly limbs and freckles, with the same wheat-colored hair as his father. Owen brought the wagon to a stop and climbed down, ruffling his son's hair. "Thomas, this is Miss Ruby Fletcher. She'll be staying with us and helping around the house." Thomas regarded Ruby with curious eyes. "Can you cook?" "Mrs. Davenport's been doing the cooking since Ma died, but Pa says her biscuits are like rocks." Ruby couldn't help but smile as she climbed down from the wagon. "I can cook quite well, actually. My mother taught me before she passed." An older woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "About time you got back, Owen. Dinner's nearly ready. Mrs. Davenport, this is Ruby Fletcher. She'll be taking over the household duties starting tomorrow," Owen said. The housekeeper's eyes narrowed as she assessed Ruby. "Well, girl, I hope you know your way around a kitchen better than you do a comb. Your hair's a right mess." Ruby self-consciously touched her auburn curls, which had indeed come loose during the long, dusty journey. "Mrs. Davenport," Owen said, his voice gentle but firm. "Miss Fletcher has had a long journey. Perhaps we could save the critiques for another time." The older woman huffed, but nodded curtly. "I've prepared the room at the end of the hall upstairs. It's small but clean." "Thank you," Ruby murmured, suddenly exhausted by the day's events. After a simple dinner during which Thomas chattered enthusiastically about his adventures with the ranch dogs, Owen showed Ruby to her room. It was indeed small, but contained a narrow bed with a clean quilt, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a small chest of drawers. "There's a key in the top drawer," Owen said, pointing. "The door locks from the inside. No one will enter without your permission." Ruby nodded, throat tight with unexpected emotion at this small courtesy. "Thank you. Get some rest, Miss Fletcher. Morning comes early on a ranch." He turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. "And if anyone asks, you're here of your own free will, being paid a fair wage for your work. That's the truth as far as I'm concerned." After he left, Ruby sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowing tears to fall. She cried for the life she'd lost, for her father's failings, for the humiliation of being sold to the highest bidder. But beneath her sorrow, a tiny seed of hope had taken root. Perhaps here, miles from anywhere, she might find some measure of peace. The following weeks established a routine that Ruby found surprisingly comforting. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for Owen and the ranch hands, spent her mornings cleaning and organizing the house that had clearly lacked a woman's touch for too long, and her afternoons teaching Thomas his letters and numbers. The boy was bright, but had fallen behind without proper schooling. Owen kept his distance, treating her with unfailing courtesy, but never lingering in her presence. Ruby found herself studying him when he wasn't aware, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled at his son, the gentleness of his hands when tending to an injured calf, the quiet authority he commanded among his men without raising his voice. One evening, about a month after her arrival, Ruby was hanging laundry on the line when she heard raised voices from the barn. Curious, she moved closer, staying hidden behind a stack of crates. "You bought her, Quinn. Don't pretend otherwise." The voice belonged to Mac Peterson, one of the ranch hands. "Half the county's talking about it." "Watch your mouth," Owen replied, his voice dangerously quiet. "Miss Fletcher is employed here, same as you. Except I didn't cost $1,200, Peterson sneered. "That's a mighty high price for a housekeeper." The sound of a body being slammed against wood made Ruby jump. "Miss Fletcher has been through enough without your insinuations," Owen growled. "You've got two choices: apologize and keep your thoughts to yourself, or pack your things and be gone by sunup." When Peterson mumbled an apology, Ruby slipped away, her heart pounding. Owen had defended her honor, even though Peterson's accusation wasn't entirely false. Yet Owen treated the bill of sale as if it meant nothing, while honoring the promise he'd made her on that first day. The next morning, Ruby was kneading dough for bread when Owen entered the kitchen, his expression troubled. "I'm afraid word has spread about how you came to be here." he said without preamble. I wanted to spare you that. Ruby continued kneading, focusing on the rhythm of her hands in the dough. I heard you and Mr. Peterson yesterday. Owen sighed, leaning against the doorframe. I'm sorry. People will talk, but it'll die down eventually. Will it? Ruby looked up, meeting his gaze. Or will I always be the woman Owen Quinn bought at auction? You're more than that, Owen said firmly. Anyone who can't see it isn't worth your concern. Ruby shaped the dough into loaves and set them aside to rise. Why did you do it? Truly? There must have been less complicated ways to find a housekeeper. Owen was quiet for so long that Ruby thought he might not answer. I was in town to mail a letter when I overheard Hicks boasting about his plans for you. I couldn't walk away. The simple honesty in his voice made Ruby's chest ache. So it was pity. Decency, Owen corrected. And perhaps a bit of selfishness. Thomas needs someone like you in his life, someone patient and kind. I've seen how you are with him. Before Ruby could respond, Thomas burst into the kitchen, brandishing a small carved wooden horse. Look what Mr. Jenkins made for me. The moment between them dissolved, but Ruby found herself thinking about Owen's words throughout the day. That night, unable to sleep, she slipped downstairs for a cup of tea and found Owen sitting at the kitchen table, a ledger open before him. Can't sleep? He asked, looking up. Ruby shook her head, moving to the stove to heat water. Too many thoughts. I know the feeling. Owen closed the ledger and rubbed his eyes. The ranch is struggling more than I let on. Bad winter, low cattle prices. Ruby poured hot water over tea leaves. Is that why you can afford to keep me, but not replace Peterson? She'd noticed they hadn't hired anyone after the ranch hand's departure. Owen looked startled, then gave a rueful laugh. Not much escapes you, does it? I've always been observant. My father said it was my least appealing quality. Ruby brought 2 cups to the table, sitting across from Owen. Your father was wrong. Owen wrapped his hands around the warm cup. Observation is intelligence, and intelligence is never unappealing. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping tea. Tell me about Sarah, Ruby said suddenly. If you don't mind. Owen's expression softened. She was born and raised in Boston. Came west as a schoolteacher, full of ideas about civilizing the frontier. He smiled at the memory. Instead, she fell in love with the wildness of it, and with me, though I've never understood why. She sounds brave, Ruby said. She was. Fearless, really. Owen's eyes grew distant. After she died, I was lost for a long time. Thomas was just 8, needing his father, but I could barely function. Mrs. Davenport moved in temporarily, but she's getting on in years. And now here I am, Ruby said softly. Owen met her gaze. Yes, here you are. Something shifted between them that night, a tentative trust taking root. Over the next few months, Ruby found herself looking forward to these late-night conversations that became a regular occurrence. Owen shared stories of his childhood in Illinois, his journey west as a young man seeking adventure, the early years of building the ranch. Ruby told him about her mother's gentle guidance. Her dreams of becoming a teacher before her father's debts made that impossible. You could still teach, Owen said one night in late summer. Thomas isn't the only child around here who could use education. Some of the neighboring ranches have children too. Ruby looked up from her mending. You think they'd let their children be taught by a woman who was sold at auction? Owen set down his coffee cup. You're more than your circumstances, Ruby. And 6 months is almost up. Soon you'll be free to choose your path. The reminder of their arrangement sent an unexpected pang through Ruby's chest. She'd grown comfortable at the Quinn Ranch, found purpose in caring for Thomas and the household. The thought of leaving made her realize how attached she'd become not just to the place and the boy, but to Owen himself. The following week, disaster struck. A sudden storm spooked the cattle during a drive to the railway station, causing a stampede that left 2 ranch hands injured and Owen with a broken leg and several cracked ribs. The doctor from the nearest town set the leg and bound his ribs, leaving Ruby to manage his care. This is humiliating. Owen growled as Ruby helped him drink water, confined to bed by the doctor's orders. I should be out there helping with the recovery. You should be following the doctor's instructions so you don't end up crippled, Ruby countered, adjusting his pillows. The men are handling things. Owen caught her wrist gently. The ranch can't afford this setback, Ruby. We were counting on the money from this cattle sale. Ruby met his troubled gaze. We'll manage. I've been keeping the books since you showed me how. We can economize further. We're already down to the bone, Owen said, frustration evident in his voice. That night, after ensuring Owen was asleep, Ruby sat at the kitchen table with the ledger and a stack of unpaid bills. The situation was worse than she'd realized. Without the cattle sale money, they might not make it through the winter. An idea formed in Ruby's mind, bold and possibly foolish, but perhaps their only option. The next morning, she saddled a horse and rode to the neighboring ranch owned by the Harises, who had 3 young children. By the end of the week, Ruby had secured agreements from 5 families to pay her to teach their children 3 days a week. It wasn't much, but combined with what they could get for the remaining cattle and horses, it might be enough to keep the ranch afloat until spring. Owen was skeptical when she told him. They agreed to hire you? Just like that. Mrs. Harris said they've been hoping someone would start a proper school. Their eldest is already 12 and can barely write his name. Ruby couldn't keep the excitement from her voice. I'll teach here in the dining room during the day and handle the household duties in the evenings. Owen studied her face. You're doing this for the ranch? For Thomas and me? Ruby smoothed her apron. I'm doing it for us. This is my home too now. The simple declaration hung in the air between them. Owen reached for her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. The 6 months are up next week. You're free to go if you want. I'll find the money somehow. Ruby turned her hand to thread her fingers through his. I'm not going anywhere, Owen Quinn. The first snowfall came early that year, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. Owen's leg was healing, though he still relied on crutches to move around. Ruby's makeshift school had grown to 12 students, with parents paying in both cash and goods, fresh meat, preserves, woolen blankets, all helping to sustain the ranch through difficult times. On a cold December evening, Ruby was reading to Thomas by the fire when a commotion outside drew their attention. Owen, who had been dozing in his chair, grabbed his crutches and made his way to the window. Riders, he said, frowning. 4 of them. Ruby felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. Who would be out in this weather? Before Owen could answer, pounding sounded at the door. Thomas looked frightened, and Ruby pulled him close as Owen moved to answer. Jedediah Hicks stood on the porch, snow dusting his heavy coat, 3 armed men behind him. Evening, Quinn. Heard you were laid up. Thought I'd check on my investment. Ruby stiffened at the sight of the man who had tried to buy her months ago. You've had too much to drink, Hicks, Owen said calmly. Get back on your horse before you freeze out here. Hicks pushed his way inside, his men following. I paid good money for that girl last spring, before you outbid me. Now I hear you're going broke. His bloodshot eyes found Ruby. Thought I might make you a new offer. Take her off your hands. Give you enough to save this pitiful ranch. Thomas pressed closer to Ruby, and she felt a surge of protective fury. I'm not property to be traded, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Hicks laughed, a harsh sound. Still got spirit, I see. Good. I like breaking the spirited ones. Owen moved with surprising speed despite his injured leg, positioning himself between Hicks and Ruby. Get out of my house. Now. Or what, cripple? Hicks sneered. You can barely stand. What happened next unfolded so quickly Ruby could hardly follow. Owen swung one crutch with calculated precision, catching Hicks under the chin and sending him stumbling backward into his men. In the confusion, Ruby grabbed the rifle kept above the fireplace, cocking it with practiced ease. Next man who moves gets a bullet, she said, aiming steadily. The ranch hands, alerted by the commotion, burst in through the back door, armed and ready. Outnumbered and outmaneuvered, Hicks and his men had no choice but to retreat, Hicks spitting threats as they departed. After ensuring they'd truly gone, Ruby lowered the rifle, her hands trembling now that danger had passed. Owen sent the ranch hands to guard the property overnight and led Thomas upstairs, returning to find Ruby still standing by the fire, arms wrapped around herself. You handled yourself well, Owen said, moving closer. Where did you learn to handle a rifle like that? My mother, Ruby said with a faint smile. She said a woman alone needs to protect herself. Owen reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. You're not alone anymore, Ruby. The tenderness in his touch broke something loose inside her. He'll be back, or someone like him. As long as that bill of sale exists, I'll never truly be free. Owen held her gaze for a long moment, then moved to his desk, retrieving a document from a locked drawer. Without hesitation, he cast it into the fire. They watched together as the paper that had bound Ruby to him curled and blackened, reduced to nothing but ash. "You've been free since the moment you stepped foot on this ranch," Owen said quietly. "But now there's no proof you were ever anything but your own woman." Ruby stared at the dying flames, tears blurring her vision. "Why now?" "Because I want there to be no doubt," Owen said, his voice rough with emotion. "About what I'm about to say." Ruby turned to face him, heart hammering. "I love you, Ruby Fletcher. Not as a replacement for Sarah, not as Thomas's caretaker, but as the remarkable woman you are." Owen took her hands in his. "I want you just as you are, brave and kind and fierce. Stay not because of an obligation or a document, but because you choose to." Ruby felt years of fear and uncertainty fall away as she looked into his earnest blue eyes. "I choose you, Owen Quinn. I think I have since that first night you treated me as a person worthy of respect and not a possession." His kiss was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. Ruby answered by winding her arms around his neck, careful of his healing ribs, deepening the kiss until they were both breathless. "Marry me," Owen whispered against her lips. "Not because I bought you, but because we found each other against all odds." Ruby's answer was another kiss, her heart too full for words. They were married on New Year's Day, 1877, in the ranch house living room with Thomas beaming proudly as he held the rings. The ranch hands and neighboring families gathered to witness their vows. Ruby wore a simple blue dress she'd sewn herself, with snowdrops in her hair that Owen had gathered from a sheltered spot by the creek. Spring brought renewal to the land and to the Quinn ranch. Cattle prices rose, Owen's leg healed completely, and Ruby's school flourished, eventually moving to a proper schoolhouse built by the community on the edge of Quinn property. When summer arrived, Ruby discovered she was expecting a child. Thomas was ecstatic at the prospect of becoming a big brother, trailing after Ruby with endless questions about the baby. "Will it be a boy or a girl? When will it get here? Can I teach it to ride?" he asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Ruby laughed, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "The baby won't arrive until winter, and we won't know if it's a boy or girl until then." Owen joined them, sitting beside Ruby and draping an arm around her shoulders. "I'm hoping for a girl with her mother's spirit," he said, pressing a kiss to Ruby's temple. "And I'm hoping for a boy with his father's heart," Ruby replied, leaning into his embrace. Thomas groaned dramatically. "You two are always saying mushy things." Owen chuckled, ruffling his son's hair. "Someday you'll understand, Thomas." As twilight deepened into night, Ruby reflected on the journey that had brought her here from the auction block in Circleville to this peaceful porch, surrounded by love. The injustice of her beginning had transformed into a life of purpose and joy, all because one man had seen her true worth when everyone else saw only property. "What are you thinking about?" Owen asked quietly as Thomas chased fireflies in the yard. Ruby squeezed his hand. "How endings can become beginnings when you least expect it." Owen nodded, understanding in his eyes. "And how sometimes the worst day of your life can lead to the best." "I was so afraid that day," Ruby admitted. "But when you said you wanted me just as I was, something shifted. No one had ever wanted me for myself before. I'll want you just as you are until my last breath," Owen promised, his voice husky with emotion. In the years that followed, their family grew with the addition of twin boys, Joseph and James, born during a fierce winter blizzard with only Owen to help deliver them. Thomas grew into a responsible young man who eventually took over much of the ranch management, allowing Owen more time with Ruby and their growing family. The Quinn Ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. Ruby's school evolved into the official Circleville School, with a proper building and additional teachers as the area grew. Jedediah Hicks eventually lost everything to gambling and drink, forced to sell his ranch and leave the territory in disgrace. The practice of selling women to pay debts faded into history, though Ruby never forgot how close she had come to a life of servitude and abuse. Each year on the anniversary of the auction, Owen would bring Ruby snowdrops, regardless of the season, sometimes having to search far and wide to find them. It became their private remembrance of where they had begun and how far they had come. On their 20th anniversary, as they sat on the same porch watching their children and grandchildren play in the yard, Owen took Ruby's hand, his touch as gentle as it had been on that first night. "Any regrets?" he asked, the lines around his eyes deepening as he smiled. Ruby shook her head, her auburn hair now streaked with silver. "Not one. Every step led me here, to you and our family. Even the darkest ones." Owen brushed his lips against her knuckles. "I told you once that you were more than your circumstances. I didn't know then how completely you would transform not just this ranch, but me." Ruby leaned against his shoulder, watching as their youngest grandchild toddled across the grass, arms outstretched toward a butterfly. "We transformed each other. That's what love does. It sees beyond what is to what could be." As the sun set on the Quinn ranch, casting long shadows across the land they had nurtured together, Ruby reflected that some journeys, no matter how painfully they begin, lead precisely where you're meant to be. What had started as a transaction had blossomed into a lifetime of love freely given and joyfully received, proof that sometimes, even in the wild and unforgiving West, hearts find their true home.